Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar, A Circular Primary Sector, the what, why and how of it all. This webinar forms part of our series Straight from the Horse's Mouth, Insights from Experts in 30 Minutes. My name is Jeff Vickers and I'm the Technical Director at thinkstep, and I have the pleasure to be your host for the next half hour. Today we're focusing in on the circular economy and a special focus on the primary sector. It's great that we've got a big audience today. And for those of you that don't know us, thinkstep is an organization that's passionate about enabling organizations to succeed sustainably. And we help companies through things like detailed carbon footprinting studies, life cycle assessment, sustainability strategy, and of course, the circular economy. We've been doing this in Australia and New Zealand for the last 15 years. Today, I'm joined by our two wonderful guest speakers, James Goddin and Alec McNeil. Before we get started, we'd like to get to know you a little bit more. So we do have two quick polls for you. So if we can just bring up the first one. Just ask if you could complete this very quickly, and then we can start to get to know you a bit more. The first poll is, what is the primary driver behind your interest in the circular economy? If you could just check one of those options. And once we've got enough votes in, we'll display the results. So it looks like delivering our sustainability goals is the clear winner. And some of the others are coming through as well, but a clear winner on the day for that one. If we could go to the next poll, we're interested in how much interest in the circular economy do you see from your key stakeholders? Very low, low, medium, high, or very high. And if you could just vote on that, we'll come back to you with the results once we've got a few more in. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Glad to see no one in the very low camp, but we've got a bit of a mix there of different results. So great to see at least some interest from most stakeholders. And thanks very much for all of you. I'm sure that will give our speakers something good to work from for this session. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. James Goddin. James is joining us all the way from the UK at the bright, shiny hour of 4:30 a.m. in the morning. So we're very appreciative for him at dialing in so early. Over the past 15 years, he's built and led multiple large-scale international collaborations. And of particular relevance for this webinar, he was the co-creator of the Material Circularity Indicator for the MacArthur Foundation. He's a qualified materials engineer with a PhD in that field. And as a little tip-off, he's planning to bring his expertise to New Zealand in the very near future. So with that, I'd like to hand over to Jim or James and let him take us through the sort of introduction to the circular economy and how it might apply to this sector. Over to you, Jim.
And good morning and good afternoon to all of you today. I'm Jim Goddin. I'm the founder at Hoskins, but for the past 10 years, I've been working very closely with the MacArthur Foundation on the development of indicators, particularly for quantifying the circular economy. And today what I'm going to do is I'll take you very briefly through what the circular economy is and what we mean by circularity. We'll look at how circularity is measured and some of the tools that are out there, why circularity matters to the primary sectors, and we'll finish up with some information on where to go next and some little case studies. So first thing to say is that the current economy is very linear. We take, we make, and we dispose, often with materials that have taken tens of years to develop and billions of dollars. And this is a huge loss of value. And it's not just in the technical sectors, we're also very wasteful when it comes to food and agriculture. And that's really the focus for today. A lot of my expertise has been focused on technical materials. I've worked very heavily with the aerospace sector and automotive, so that's where my primary focus has been. But this is equally applicable to biological materials. So firstly, the circular economy, what is it? It's an attempt to decouple growth from that linear economy by keeping materials in flow for as long as possible at the highest possible value. So this means separating out biological and technical material flows in what is called by the MacArthur Foundation the butterfly diagram. So here we have the flow of materials from top to bottom, and we're trying to recapture that value through reuse and remanufacturing and recycling, with a focus on the inner loops, what's called the inner loops. So maintaining the manufactured value of the product as well as just the material value. There is a decrease in value from reuse through to recycling. There's also a focus on using renewable energy as part of this and on alternative systems for sale. So product as a service offerings, shared access to products. This is all part of the circular economy. So what we need to separate out is what the circular economy system is versus circularity. So the circular economy system is what we're actually trying to deliver. So this includes all of the benefits of circularity. And as the circular economy suggests, the primary focus is on the economic benefit and delivering that. And that is primarily why it has been such a positive move and why there's a lot of interest in the circular economy. Also the environmental benefits, so energy, CO2, waste, and the social benefits in terms of job creation, responsible sourcing of materials. Circularity, on the other hand, relates to the flow of materials. So it's how effectively we've decoupled our manufacturing, our production, and our use of products from that linear flow of materials. So it's how we deliver these benefits, and it's, as I said, a measure of how much we've decoupled growth from linear consumption. So there are several different ways to measure product circularity. The one I've been involved in mostly is the one on the left, which is the Material Circularity Indicators, which was a project with the MacArthur Foundation not long after I joined Granta and not long after the MacArthur Foundation had got started. Now, if you want to play around with this methodology, there is a free tool on my website, and you're welcome to play around with that. It is quite basic. If you want to go into that in a bit more detail, probably the best place for using that methodology is Gabby, and I'm sure Jeff and Barbara will be happy to talk to you about how to access that. That's a really way of embedding that methodology into the design process and the evaluation of specific products. If you're looking at something a bit more specific and with a view to putting a label on your product, really the main system out there is cradle to cradle certification. That is a bit more onerous. It takes a bit more information and preparation. You really need a consultant to help you prepare the evidence base you'd need. And again, I'm sure Jeff or Barbara would be happy to talk to you about how to go about that, or I'm happy to put you in touch with someone from the Cradle to Cradle Product Institute directly if you want to contact me. So why is measuring circularity useful? The first thing to say is that circularity has multiple indicators or levers. So these are things that you can change to improve circularity. And you can see those on the left-hand side of this slide. The ones that are obviously most relevant to the circular bioeconomy is things like regenerative biomaterials, composting, and in some cases, energy recovery. There are isolated cases where that has been allowed by the methodology as a last resort. It's particularly useful for things like biopolymers, which currently don't have a very good end-of-life infrastructure to handle those. What the methodology does is distill all of those different levers down into one metric, which is the MCI, the Material Circularity Indicator, and that varies between 0.1 for linear and 1 for circular, and it gets progressively hard to improve the score as you go on. So distilling those down into a single metric that then allows you to compare different product scenarios, different products, and different use cases. Measuring circularity is also useful because obviously you can't improve what you don't measure. We want to be able to use circularity to feed into our design process. About 80% of the environmental impact of products is locked in from the design stage. So we really want to embed this methodology into the design of our product and our system. And that was the major focus for me and then the tools that I worked with at Granta. We want to be able to benchmark our products against our competitors and to demonstrate that we've improved. We want to be able to evaluate how our system is performing. The circular economy is one of those things that contains quite a lot of market-specific components. So if your evaluation of how the consumer will behave is different, you'll get a very different result potentially. So you want to be able to reevaluate how your circular system is performing, and obviously to market your product to your consumer. We also want to be able to optimize the benefits from circularity, so to be able to balance circularity against those economic, environmental, and social benefits, and through that to embed a degree of resilience into our product and our business, and also to encourage investment, and increasingly investors are looking at these types of metrics. So when we come to applying material circularity to the primary sectors, the first thing to say is that biological materials are a vital part of the circular economy, both for food and for circular biomaterials. And a major focus has been on regenerative production and what we term regenerative production. There isn't currently a fixed definition of what regenerative production is for the circular economy. It's not embedded in any particular standard, but what it does generally mean is minimizing those linear extraction and waste flows, maintaining production capacity, maintaining natural capital, so the ability of your system and your environment to regenerate indigenous ecosystems, to enhance biodiversity, to recapture nutrients and water, in many cases by working with people up and down the supply chain. So recapturing those materials and feeding them back into your system. Part of the reason for that is improving soil health. We also want to apply the circular economy to equipment. So the manufacturing and production equipment that we use to generate our materials. And as I said back at the beginning, we need to focus on use of renewable energy, whether that's renewable electricity or biofuels. The primary reason behind a lot of this is risk mitigation. And again, that's one of the reasons why the circular economy fits so well into many corporate structures, because most have a strong focus on risk mitigation already. And to go through some of those risks, obviously we have risk in the primary sectors of a loss of topsoil. We've lost about half of this in the last 150 years. New Zealand, I think, is estimated to be losing 200 million tonnes of topsoil per year. It's 24 billion tonnes globally, and that equates to hundreds of billions of dollars of lost economic value. The focus of the circular economy on regenerating those natural systems and improving the viability of indigenous systems really feeds into how we start to tackle this sort of problem, and should be an enabler for this. And again, that's the sort of thing that investors are likely to be looking at. Another area that I've worked quite heavily on is critical materials, and phosphate rock, which you'll see just in the blue section at the bottom here, has been on the EU critical material list for a number of years. Part of the challenge with this is we're heavily dependent on about 5 countries that produce about 90% of the global supply of phosphate rock. We may only have a couple of decades left of this resource. It's very important for agriculture as a soil improver, and if we don't have that, the output of agriculture is set to half. So there's a lot of concern over how we deal with that resource, how we can recover that from waste and from sewage, how we can minimize overspill and losses of these materials, and how we can avoid that sort of crisis. Obviously, biodiversity, we are in the middle of an extinction event. Improving and retaining that biodiversity and all the benefits that brings is also a focus of the circular economy and of circularity as it applies to the primary sectors. Now, when we come to water, this is obviously also a risk. We have a lot of droughts and fires, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware. The water doesn't fit within the circularity diagram that I showed you, the butterfly diagram, but has its own diagram, which you can see here on screen. And again, the focus of this is to retain the value in that water, to maximize both quality and quantity of that, and availability to natural systems. So there are an increasing number of examples of circular economy for primary industries and biological products. You can see some of those on screen. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but they include bio-derived packaging for detergents that will fit through your letterbox, bio-derived clips for vineyards, so you don't have to worry about collecting those at the end of their use. You've got Uhu, which is an edible water container, which actually tastes quite nice. Google are working on a system for using AI to analyze the content of bins in restaurants to minimize waste. That's another example of the circular bioeconomy, or the circular economy applied to biomaterials. You have kiwi forks generated from kiwi waste, and you have what's on the screen, the only cradle certified product, which is a reusable diaper with biodegradable home compostable inserts. And we're actually using these ourselves at the moment with our youngest, and they work very well. So just to conclude, there are obviously very many risks for the primary sector. The circular economy is a point of focus that can help to mitigate these and to demonstrate leadership. That's important for investors and consumers who are increasingly aware of the environmental and the resource constraints. That sort of focus can help you to secure sales and investment. There is a risk of being disrupted. So you either have to disrupt your own business or take that risk of being disrupted by a new market entrant. A lot of the established businesses are either unable or unwilling to adjust from a systemic point of view, but there are a lot of new businesses that aren't and are coming onto the market and causing quite a lot of disruption. So if you don't take this on board, there's an increasing chance that somebody else will do it for you. And we do have the tools to redesign the system. We have tools to measure circularity, as I've shown. We can combine these with circular life cycle assessment to understand the impacts and the benefits, and to deliver greater economic value and improve resilience for the future. So these are my details on screen. Again, if you want to contact me, I'm more than happy to take questions afterwards. But with that, I'll hand over to Jeff again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim. And I see there's a few questions coming in, which is great. I might just be cheeky and flick one to you now, Jim, and then I'll hand over to Alec. So Rachel asks, how can you measure circularity in a service-based system?
When it comes to an entirely service-based system, I guess what you need to look at is what your competition is, or what product are you replacing. So a lot of the components in the metric, particularly when it comes to things like utility and material flow, are comparative in nature. So you're comparing your products against the serviceability of the incumbent linear solution. So there is a component that's embedded within circularity that allows you to do that. It is obviously difficult if you have an entirely service-based system to apply circularity because you have no materials to circulate. But there are components within the MCI that allow you to deal with that comparative example.
Thank you, Jim. And with that, I'd like to hand over to our next speaker, Alec McNeil. So Alec is the Solid Waste Manager at Marlborough District Council. He speaks today in his role as a Foundation Trustee at Agricovery, New Zealand's rural recycling program, and he's been involved in the waste industry since the 90s, and he's particularly keen in advancing the coordination between private and public entities around product stewardship in New Zealand. So over to you, Alec.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Just to give you some context, the scheme started probably 14, 15 years ago, and I guess the challenge at the time was it was very much an individual response. So the growers and the farmers were really left to sort out the packaging that they had left themselves. And obviously there was a risk, just to follow on from what James said, there was a risk to both how that material was dealt with and also to the brands associated with those plastic drums and those chemicals. So really the key challenges were trying to develop a system that was convenient and cost effective for the primary industry sector, but also that we had end markets. So once we collected the volume of plastic or the chemical itself, that we actually had a place to send it to, an actual pull-through demand from the market. So the Foundation Trust basically was set up in 2006, and effectively it's a voluntary product stewardship scheme, and the Agricovery brand itself is a recognised global brand. We set the trust up as a not-for-profit, so we don't have a commercial imperative. Sitting inside that not-for-profit is a standard business unit that has budgets and it responds to the Board of Trustees in a normal business setup, and I'm one of those trustees. And in terms of the product stewardship scheme, that at that moment in time, the Ministry for the Environment had an accreditation scheme for voluntary. The legislation then came along, 4 or 5 years later with the Waste Minimisation Act that allows the government to put in mandatory product stewardship, and there's a conversation going on now in New Zealand that is promoting that principle, and there was discussions out last year from the Ministry. Effectively, it's you pay at the point of sale, so the cost of recovering the empty container or the spent chemical is built into the cost at the retail side, and then when you return the material, there's no further cost to the farmer or the grower. And at this moment in time, the foundation itself, its management function, looks after the day-to-day operations of the collection system. These are the sectors that are covered on the board. I obviously come under the Regional Council banner, and it started in that part of New Zealand. It started in Waikato, so that's why that Regional Council is involved. But we've got the major primary industry sectors involved there, and we've got AgCam on the chemical side, and then we've also got the rural contractors who might be using these products or these chemicals in a primary industry setting. That's a picture of the board, but the main thing to look at there is the vehicle in the background. So that's basically a standard articulated trailer that is an all-in-one unit. So what we have is a conveyor belt system that feeds in at the front end, that folds up when the vehicle's moving. And then inside there's a shredding unit, and then shredded plastic is then put into these bulk bags at the back. And we've got 2 of these trucks, that one for the North and one for the South Island. We also collect baled materials, so the product is either shredded or baled from the collection system, and then that goes back to Astron Plastics up in Auckland, and then they reconstitute it into new plastic products. And then in terms of what we do, there's 3 main areas as outlined in the slide there. We've got the chemical recovery, we've got the container collection of various sizes, and then we've got what they call the drum collection. And we've got a range of collection options. We've got a number of sites around the country, 95 fixed location sites, but we also run what we would call sort of pop-up events, And if the number of containers is large enough, then we can actually send the collection service direct to the farmer. And obviously we have a reporting and a management system that captures all the data, and that allows us to aggregate the tonnage and then report on that on an ongoing basis to the board and back to the brand holders as well. So what have we achieved? This year was slightly disrupted because of COVID. It did knock us out for a couple of months where we didn't really have the collection, so we did drop back slightly on last year. But we're sort of north of the 400-ton mark, and next year we're aiming to get closer towards the 500-ton mark. Some of the one-stop shops, these are basically our sort of pop-up events where we'll go to a location that's maybe suitable to the farming community or the grower community, but it's not a fixed site. And we'll basically set up a service offering there which collects the drums, but it'll also collect other materials as well, so things like silage wrap and other agricultural waste streams. And then we have these other, what we call chemical events, where we actually, again, we work with regional councils or willing partners, and what we're trying to do there is get control of unwanted chemicals. They might be legacy chemicals that are out of date and have, certainly passed by the shelf life. And the interesting thing there is that the demand doesn't seem to be dissipating. Every time we run an event, we get a really good response and a really high recovery rate. So it shows that the material is out there. A lot of it is legacy chemicals. I mean, modern day chemicals, there's quite a science behind that. It's not just buying a volume of chemical that you don't need. It's expensive material. So generally there's a plan sits behind that and informs the grower or the farmer exactly how much they need, and then they buy to that demand. And obviously the agri-chemists who are working out that approach on the ground, they will look at any stock material that's on site on the farm and figure out whether that could be used in the application that the farmer's trying to achieve. And we also have a project for the Waste Minimisation Fund to undertake a project into co-designing a process for farm plastics. So that's predominantly silage wrap, but other materials as well. And this is, I guess, an infographic at the end. It's shown the year before last, because we only just closed off this year. But effectively, you can see we don't run a league table sort of mentality. So where I'm based in Blenheim has got a pretty high recovery rate. But to give context there, we're a primary industry region, so we have viticulture, we have farming, we've got agriculture, so we've got a lot of activity going on that use the drums and the chemicals. And in terms of the chemical programme, there are chemicals that are approved by the scheme, but there's also that legacy impact as well. So I think for us, the key point is that we are a voluntary scheme. That has pros and cons. I guess on the pro side, we've built this from scratch with the brand holders and with the various companies that have helped us along the way. We run the scheme now, but we used to operate the scheme with a previous service provider. So there's been a lot of people involved in creating the credibility of the scheme and establishing that sort of reputational sort of solid foundation. But ultimately, we respond to the brand owners. So we've got a strong relationship with them. We're there to serve them and to serve the general community, the growers and the users of the scheme. I guess if we went to mandatory, the advantage would be that we would capture everybody. There are some people, we probably have I think from memory, it's around 90% of the brand holders at the moment are in the scheme. So there are some providers of chemicals and drums out there that aren't part of the scheme. So I guess with mandatory, you would capture the wider audience. But if it's not a co-design process, then it's that classic dilemma where you could have the legislation done to you instead of having the ability to inform the design. So I think we're supportive of the mandatory approach, but through a co-design lens, we would like to be at the table and design those schemes. So when we're thinking about agricultural plastics and other challenges within the rural sector, then that's what we were interested in. We want to be at that table and advocating on behalf of that sector to make sure the scheme is designed with the farmer in mind so that it's easy to access and is cost effective. I think that's me, and I'll flip back to Jeff.
Thanks very much, Alec. And there are a few questions that have come in, so thanks for those who've submitted them, but I'm conscious we're on the hour now and we've run out of time. So we will have to come back to those questions as a follow-up via email in the coming week. So apologies for that, we will get back to you. And I'd really like to thank Jim and Alec for joining us today for the session. It's been an interesting and insightful presentation. We do have a few webinars coming up where we'd love to see you, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And if you do have any specific topics that you'd like us to cover, please just get back to us and let us know. Thanks everyone, have a great day, and thanks again to our speakers. All the best, bye.